Content warning. This story contains references to domestic abuse. Reader discretion advised. When the engines rolled into Maple Ridge, the town stilled as if someone had pressed pause on its ordinary noise. Chrome flashed in the morning sun. The rumble moved down Main Street and settled like a tide outside a small diner that smelled of bread and cheap coffee. Patrons looked up from newspapers and pie, hands half raised over steaming cups. Conversations thinned to a dozen small, startled silences. Inside the diner, Mara kept moving. She carried a tray with practiced calm, set plates down with a soft clink, wiped the rim of a cup as if each motion could smooth the tightness that lived in the joints of her hands. Her smile was efficient. Her eyes kept to the floor when a regular joked a little too familiar. On her jaw, half hidden by a sweep of hair and the shadow of a booth, there was a pale bruise. It was the kind of bruise that did not demand attention, but suggested a story. One glance, and then an instinct to look away. Rex Malone saw it because he had learned to see small things. He had been leader of the Ridge Riders long enough to know the language of gestures. Who flinched when doors slammed, who limped at night, who avoided eye contact. He'd come that morning for the coffee more than anything, a place to warm his hands beneath the diner's old lamps. He noticed the bruise the way someone notices a weather change, quiet, precise, and immediate. He remembered a moment that sat in the hollow of his chest. A face, a younger hand. He had not done enough once before. It was never a story he told, but that memory had weight like a coin in his pocket, habitual and present. That coin pressed at him now. He stood, set his cup down, and listened harder. The diner manager, tall with a tight line at the corners of his mouth, moved through the room with a tone that wore down people. It was small acts, a sharp word about a spilled glass, a public correction that turned into a small humiliation. That day, his voice clipped across Mara as she cleared a plate. He made her apologize for something trivial, and she did, the sentence falling out of her like an offering. She flinched when he brushed past her shoulder. Her hand trembled. A regular in the corner tutted and turned back to his crossword. No one spoke. The engine's echo outside felt suddenly very far away. If quiet courage matters to you, stay with this story a moment, Rex thought, and for a second the world narrowed to a decision he had to make. He did not rush. He had never been a man of unchecked fury. His life had taught him the value of measured moves. That night, in the garage behind the clubhouse, where chrome caught the dim light like small moons, he sat on an upturned crate and put his palms together until his knuckles ached. Around him, his clubmates leaned against bikes, their conversation low. They had listened to him more than once, trusted him when bad weather came. He told them only what needed telling. There was a woman in the diner who seemed afraid, a manager who used his voice like a tool for control, and he would go speak to both of them. No threats, no posturing, just a presence that offered another option. Word had a way of arriving early in small towns. The next morning, the Ridge Riders' bikes were parked in a neat row outside the diner, engines quiet, as if the roar had been folded and set down on the curb. The sight knitted the town's eyes into curious lines. Some people stepped outside to watch, others pretended not to. Rex walked in slow, took a seat at the counter as if he had been coming in for coffee every day of his life. He watched Mara move. He watched the manager's posture when he corrected a syringe of spilled sugar into a cup. He waited until there was nothing left for him to misinterpret. He went to the manager first. He did not lean across the counter with a swagger or shout accusations. He spoke low. His voice had the calm of someone used to being heard before he raised it. He said a few simple things. That he had noticed the way the manager talked to his staff. That power was not proved by diminishing people. that when someone used their position to make another shrink, it changed how the whole room breathed. The manager snapped something back, something sharp enough to peel the varnish off a quiet morning, then tried to shove the moment aside with a laugh. Rex did not return the joke. He told the man something he could not deny, that people were watching now, that respect mattered more than fear, and that if someone in his care showed signs of harm, the right move was to make them safe, not to make them smaller. There was a subtle insistence in Rex's tone, a firm boundary that left no room for the manager to escalate. The manager, who had long been used to having his voice fill rooms, faltered. He looked at the faces of the customers, at the line of motorcycles through the window. A heat rose in his cheeks, not the heat of apology, but of exposure. He had built himself a small kingdom of compliance. Confrontation with the gang leader did not threaten him physically. It took from him the thing he'd been hoarding, the belief that he could dominate without consequence. He left the counter without dramatic exit, small and quick, the door shutting softly behind him. Silence filled the space after he closed the door. It was not a silence of fear. It was a held breath that could be released. Mara's hands shook as she sank onto a stool. She let out a sound that was both a laugh and a sob. Tears fell in a slow, honest way. She was not rescued with a single cinematic act. She leaned into the moment as one leans into a lighted doorway, and with the first shaky breath, she began to choose. Rex pulled a napkin from the dispenser and offered it without a glance at the others. He did not ask for her story. He said simply, "You don't have to say anything." Later, when he stepped back outside to the bikes, he told his club the thing he had to say. "We watch each other. We help where we can." It was not a manifesto, only a principle. The riders nodded, and the gesture spread. The town watched the aftermath the same way it had watched the engines, with curiosity first, then recognition. Some people who had laughed when bikers rolled by now found themselves standing a little straighter when Rex passed. Others avoided him. Old fears are not easily unlearned. A few regulars muttered about positions and propriety. But a small shift occurred. A neighbor offered to cover a shift. A woman who had been quiet at the counter asked Mara if she wanted to come and work at her cafe. A boy who had been told bikers were trouble followed them back to the garage and saw men wiping down helmets, stacking canned goods for a donation run. Rex did not make a show of reforming his club into saintly figures. That would have been false. Instead, he suggested modest things. Rides to the shelter to carry mattresses, a weekend where the club's profits from a small run would go to help with rent for someone in a pinch. The riders volunteered in increments that fit their lives, an hour here, an afternoon there, actions stitched into the ordinary fabric of the town rather than heroics on a billboard. For Mara, the change was both immediate and slow. She kept working at the diner long enough to save money and find a quieter option. A few weeks later, she took a job at the cafe on Elm, where the manager's voice was soft and there was a schedule on the wall that did not bend around anyone's temper. Her shoulders eased in a way that was almost imperceptible at first. She learned to walk through a door without measuring every sound. She started saying no in small ways and felt the word stick. People in town began to grate her by name. When she smiled now, it reached her eyes. The smile wasn't only a tool for keeping the job. Rex checked in once in a while. He did not stand in her doorway with questions, but left a bag of groceries on her porch, or a note that read simply, "You did what you needed." Their exchanges were careful. He knew better than to make himself the center of her recovery. Any absolution he sought was private and imperfect. He carried his own regret like a scar, visible only when he thought about the man he'd been before deciding to be better. The manager's departure from the diner did not solve every problem. There were murmurs. Some said he was humiliated. Others said justice would have been better served by formal channels. The town sorted its opinions. But what grew louder than the gossip was a new habit. People who saw trouble no longer looked away as often. Stories like Mara's are not cured by a single confrontation. They are moved by a series of small acts. A friend checking in, a neighbor offering a couch for a night, a club that brings blankets to a shelter. The biker's presence shifted from a threat to a resource in people's minds because they chose to show up in ways that respected others' dignity. Months later, the sound of motorcycles again threaded through Maple Ridge, now carrying a different weight. Not the roar of spectacle, but a steady hum that threaded through an afternoon market and past the church steps. On one such day, Rex pulled to the end of Main, rolled down his visor, and raised his hand in a brief, muted salute toward a woman carrying a box of pastries out of the cafe. She looked up, and for an instant their eyes met. The woman was Mara. Her smile was real. She lifted her chin and returned the gesture with a small, practiced wave. It was a quiet image, a leader of a once-feared gang and a woman who had reclaimed the edges of her life acknowledging each other, in a town that had learned to pay attention. The engines did not drown the conversation or demand it. They punctuated an ordinary moment of recognition. Some of the riders had started a small annual run that raised money for a neighborhood fund. The club painted a mural in a community garden. These acts did not erase the past, nor did they absolve the mistakes that had brought Rex to that diner. They did something else. They made possible an ongoing pattern of care. The unexpected move that morning had not been violence. It had been a decision to show up as a witness and to refuse in words and in presence to let cruelty stand unchallenged. The manager's exit had not ended struggle. It opened space for choices. Mara's recovery was a slow knit of small mercies, and the rider's transformation was incremental, honest work, being accountable, asking what help really meant, listening. On an overcast afternoon sometime after, Rex parked across from the cafe, switched off his engine, and watched Mara close the door at the end of her shift. She glanced his way, saw him, and smiled without reserve. He lifted a hand. No grand pronouncements were necessary. The town kept turning. People kept making mistakes and trying to repair them, and kindness arrived in forms people would not have predicted. If you felt moved by how ordinary courage can change a life, consider passing this story along to someone else who might need to see it.